Here are 13 things that might be ruining your mix. Number 1, over-processing your drum samples. Now this is something that I fell victim to a lot when I first started mixing. I was downloading all of these drum kits from online, and when I used them in my songs, I was adding so many plugins and trying to fix something that really wasn't broken. Most of these kick samples and snares and hi-hats that you're downloading have already had tons of processing added to them, like compression and saturation. So really there's no point in adding additional processing if you don't need it. Ask yourself, why are you adding a certain plugin to your kick or your 808? What are you trying to achieve and what are you trying to change? Because stacking those plugins up can sound fun, but it can actually destroy that drum sample and really take the life out of your mix. Number 2, not comparing your mix to a reference mix. So what is a reference track? Well, it's basically a song that is similar to yours in terms of arrangement and instrumentation, and is ultimately something that you want your track to sound like in the end. So how would you ever know when your mix is ready to go if you don't compare it to other mixes in the world that already sound amazing and have been well received by the consumers? You need to compare your mix to a well-mixed reference track so that you can identify any areas where your mix might be lacking. Maybe the low end of your track isn't hitting hard. Maybe the vocals aren't as present in the mid-range. It's good to actively listen to a reference track and really dissect what it is that makes you think that mix is a good mix, and then try to apply that to your own mix. Number 3, using too much reverb. Now, reverb is something that is very easy to overdo. I mean, it really just makes things sound cool and interesting. But the problem with adding too much reverb is that it can distract and take away from the actual audio that you're placing the reverb on. And if you add reverb to every single element in your mix, it can quickly become a big muddy mess. So my advice would be, 1, really ask yourself if this sound actually needs reverb, and 2, how much reverb does it need? Am I trying to add subtle ambiance to the vocal performance, or am I trying to create a huge chamber sound for the snare drum? Understand the role that you want your reverb to play in your mix. This will make you more intentional with what you're doing with the reverb in your mix, and ultimately help you avoid making the mistake of adding too much reverb. Number 4, not EQing your reverb. Now this kind of piggybacks off of the last mistake, but with reverbs, you really want to place them in their own pocket. A reverb can build up some muddy frequencies in the low end that likely just don't need to be in your mix. So what do you do with them? Well, you get rid of them. There's other things that are fighting to exist in the low end, so why would you want to make it even harder for those things like the kick and the 808 to exist in your mix? And the same can go for the top end frequencies. Don't be afraid to roll them off and experiment with the EQ, and you'll find that you'll actually create more clarity for the reverb and the sound that you're placing the reverb on. Number 5, not getting good recordings from the start. Now this is pretty simple, but if you have poorly recorded audio, it's just going to be harder to get it to sound amazing in the mix. So invest in acoustic treatment, a decent mic, preamp, and interface. Do what you need to do in order to be able to capture high quality recordings. Trust me, it's going to make mixing the track a whole lot easier if you have good audio files to mix. Number 6, overthinking the mix. Look, you have to trust your gut. As a mixer, you are making so many small decisions. Once you get near the finish line, you should minimize the amount of changes you make. Chances are that initial place that you got the mix to was a great sounding mix. And the further and further you get from where your initial intuition took you, the worse it's likely going to sound. And you'll also be wasting a lot of time making these tiny changes over and over again. Number 7, mixing a sound in solo. Now this basically means that you're muting everything besides the sound that you're mixing at that exact moment. And you make that element sound amazing by itself, but then when you add in the other elements, it doesn't complement or fit with the rest of the track. That's because you can make anything sound good by itself, but how it fits together with the rest of the puzzle is ultimately what matters. So it's all right to solo a track while mixing it, but make sure you're checking it often in regards to how it sounds in the entire mix. Number 8, removing too much of the transients. Now, dealing with the transients is one of the more challenging things you're going to face in mixing. If you want a loud mix, you have to manage and tame the transients. But if you do this too much and in the wrong way, you're going to remove a lot of the punch and the life from your track. Be intentional when you're using limiters, compressors, and clippers. Understand what you're removing from a sound. Those peaks in your audio can quickly become non-existent when you slam them into a bunch of processing. The goal when I add a clipper to my drums, for example, is only to remove what I can from the drums without actually changing the sound of the drums. Some of the transient information can be removed and it really won't be noticeable to the ear. So once you hear a change become noticeable, you'll know that you're getting into that territory of really damaging the transient. So back it off a little and leave a little transient to provide your mix with some life. Number 9, getting the attack and release settings wrong when you're using compression. Compression is all about timing. When you're pulling things down and then letting them go, you really risk running into the problem of this effect becoming too noticeable. For example, if your release time is too slow, you might be getting a pumping effect on your sound because the compressor is taking too long to let go of the signal. And vice versa, if you set your release time too fast, you might not be getting the type of compression that you're wanting to hear because the compressor is letting go so fast that the compression has no time to hold on to the signal. Now with the attack time, if you go too fast, you're really going to kill the transients, which might be your objective. But if you go too slow, you won't be taming enough of the transient and it's still going to sound uncontrolled and too dynamic. Both the attack and the release settings are completely dependent on not only the objective of what you're trying to accomplish, but also the tempo and vibe of your song. Experiment with these two knobs on your compressor and let your ears tell you when you have them set correctly. Number 10, too much low end. Now this is such an easy mistake to make because everybody wants that bass to hit hard and that kick drum to cut through the mix. And what they end up doing is just turning up the volume fader or grabbing an EQ and boosting the low frequencies. And this is going to absolutely destroy your mix. Because what does every song have at the end of the mastering chain? A limiter. And limiters will eat that low end up and make things sound terrible. So there are tricks and techniques to make your low end sound louder without actually raising the volume fader or bumping up the bass with an EQ. Techniques like saturation, distortion, parallel compression, and clipping are all going to help you in some way to make the bass be perceived as loud within the mix. Number 11, not doing a car test. You have to go check how your mix sounds in the car. If you get everything sounding good in your studio, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate onto another system. And the car is a great system to see if it translates. Everybody listens to music in their car. To me, it's the greatest place to check out how your mix sounds. But I wouldn't even stop there. Everybody has one of these, right? And chances are, that's the first place somebody's going to hear your song is on an iPhone speaker. See how your mix sounds on multiple devices and make changes if necessary. Number 12, making things sound too digital. In today's world, a lot of people are either completely in the box or they are doing a hybrid setup. Everything is digitized in a sense, whereas back in the day, you had all of this analog hardware that had tubes and transistors. You had tape, and the list just goes on and on. Well, those components gave the music some character and some attitude. And now with everything going through the computer, that feeling just gets lost. Everything is so clean and perfect and aligned to the grid within your DAW. But sometimes that's not what you want. Add some grit to the kick drum, make that guitar sound dirty. Saturation is a great tool for this when you're mixing in the box. Harmonics are just going to make things sound more full and complete. Stop focusing so much on having that tight and clean mix and instead ask yourself, how do I add some warmth and character to my mix? Number 13, terrible recording techniques. Now this one is easily avoidable if you are actually the one who is doing the recording. Now I know some of you are just receiving files to mix, but if you have control over the recording process in any way, you need to take it seriously. Think about the microphone selection, the mic placement, the acoustic treatment, setting the preamp gain correctly, recording in a quiet space. Like all of these things are going to have a tremendous impact on the sound that is recorded into the computer. And the closer you get to a great sound coming into the box, the easier it will be to mix a great song. Trying to clean up and correct everything in the mix is going to make it very difficult to have a natural sounding mix. Plugins have come a very long way, but trust me, focus on getting a good recording before focusing on the mix. mix. All right, so that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the content. Please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.